This is going to be a video covering the basic elements of rhythm, and for this video I'm going to use a couple of the lessons that are available on musictheory.net. Again, this website, which we use for a lot of our assignments, is also a great place to go for customized exercises, or you can go through the lessons as well. A lot of these lessons cover the same material that we cover in class. And that's actually where I'm going to go, is to lessons and note duration. You can always come back here on your own and check this stuff out on your own, at your own pace. But I'm going to cover it here. So as far as rhythm goes, first let me discuss the term rhythm and sort of what it has to do with. We all have somewhat of a sense of the idea of the term rhythm and what it means. But basically the definition of rhythm is the organization of time in music. Without rhythm, we wouldn't have any sort of sense of time in music, and the way that we organize time is through duration, how long things are performed for, whether they're notes or they're bits of silence. So we're going to start with notes, and the first thing that's mentioned here is it says that the length of time that a note is played is called note duration, which is determined by the type of note. We have 5 types of notes here on the screen. And it says the whole note has the longest duration in modern music. This is half true. For our purposes, this is true, but in the future, this will not be true because there are notes that are longer. And actually, you will have some assignments in the near future where there's notes that are slightly longer than this. But before I go on, I want to talk about the way that we classify our notes and how it's different than some other places in the world. We refer to our note durations using fractions like whole, half, quarter, eighth, and if you know your fractions very well, then you'll have an easy time figuring out how many notes fit into other notes as far as durations go. But that's not the way that it works throughout the world. For example, if we were in Great Britain, they would use a system where certain notes are called crotchets and some are called minims, and it's a little bit different. So this is not a universal system. Just keep that in mind. It is the system that's used in the United States. And when musicians have to move to the United States, sometimes it takes them a little while to get used to this system. Say it's about half and half throughout the world, the systems that are used. It's basically the same idea, but ours is, in my opinion, a little bit more rational because we're using these mathematical numbers to refer to the notes. So this is a whole note, and a whole note looks like just a circle. And notes consist of note heads and stems, and a whole note is just a note head. And it's almost a circle. See, it's more ovular, but it's basically a circle just without the stem. And the next one over is the half note. The half note has half the duration of a whole note, which you would figure that makes sense. If you have a whole pizza, and you eat half of it, you have half left because there are 2 halves that fit into a whole note. I'll give you an example of what I use sometimes when I teach music appreciation, which is designed for students who are not music majors. Some of you may have taken this class actually before. Sometimes music majors take it as well. I'll talk about this concept of wholes, halves, quarters, and things, and show the students that sometimes we don't think terribly logically about this, and I'll make up some sort of question like, how many quarters are there in a game of Estonian rugby? And a lot of the time I get these furrowed brows and go, well, I have no idea because I don't know what Estonian rugby is. But the thing is that if you're thinking logically, that's not the part of the question that you need to know. The part that you need to be concerned with is quarters, and if there are quarters, that means that there's 4 of them. That's why in hockey that they're called periods, not quarters, because there's 3 of them. So again, we need to think very rationally and very logically about this. This is a half note, and a half note, looks like somewhat like the whole note, only it has a stem on it. As we discussed, 2 half notes occupy the same amount of time as 1 whole note. And you can see that on the screen here, that this whole note breaks into 2 half notes. If you smashed that whole note or cut it in half, you'd end up with 2 half notes. Then the next step is the quarter note. A quarter note looks like a half note that's filled in, and a quarter note is 1/4 or a quarter of a whole note. And 4 quarter notes occupy the same amount of time as 1 whole notes. 2 quarter notes equal the duration of a half note. So you can see up at the top, here's our whole. Break it into halves and you have 2. Break it into quarters, you have 4. And it makes sense because if you have 4 quarters, you have a whole dollar. So 4 quarter notes, you have a whole note. And then notes smaller in duration than a quarter note have flags. And here's the flag. It looks like a quarter note with a flag. And by the way, the flags are always on the right side of the note. Imagine that there's a fan on the left side and it's always blowing to the right. Flags always point to the right regardless of which direction the notes are facing, whether it's up or down. Flag is always on the right. And this is an example of an eighth note. And an eighth note has one flag. And you can see it kind of hanging off there to the right. And therefore, 2 eighth notes occupy the same amount of time as 1 quarter note. Break that quarter into eighths, and we end up with 2 eighth notes. So if you think about it, a quarter note, if you take the fraction 1/4 times 1/2, you end up with 1/8. And that's kind of what's going on here, is that if you find a half of a quarter, you end up with an eighth. And this is what an eighth note looks like a quarter note with the flag off to the right. By the way, when you combine these, and this will be mentioned in a later video, when you combine eighth notes together, the flags attach to each other and turn into what are called beams. And a 16th note is the farthest one that we have over to the right, and it has 2 flags, and it says that the 2 flags have the value again. So 2 16th notes equal the duration of an eighth note. We see that over here. So that's one step even further. 4 16th notes occupy the same amount of time as a quarter note. And it says, although it is possible to have notes with 3 or more flags, they are seldomly used. We do need to know about them, though, because they can be used, and we'll see some of these later in the semester. If you add another flag, think about your math here. This was 1/8, this is 1/16. 16 is 8 times 2, and then if you think of 16 times 2, it's 32. This is what's called a 32nd note. 32 times 2 is 64. This is a 64th note. Every time you add a flag, you're multiplying that denominator by 2. So if we added one more flag to this, it'd be a little bit ridiculous, but we'd have a 128th note. And then we have a chart that shows all of the types of notes that we just discussed. The whole note, the half notes, the quarter notes, the eighth notes, and the 16th notes. Now I'm going to go to another lesson, the rest duration, because rests are similar to notes. And let me resize my window here a bit so that we can see everything. I know the text is not huge on the screen, so I'm going to make sure to read all of that. So we have notes and we have rests. A note tells a performer to play a note for a specific duration. A rest tells a performer to be silent for a specific duration. And that's what's said here. Rests represent periods of silence in a measure. And each type of rest shares a duration with a certain type of note. We had on the screen before whole, half, quarter, eighth, and 16th notes. And now we have whole, half, quarter, eighth, and 16th rests. Going on. For example, both a quarter rest and a quarter note occupy the same amount of time. And those are the ones that are highlighted here. While the note would make a sound, the rest is silent, but they occupy the same amount of time. So it says, to demonstrate this, let's fill a measure of 4/4 time with quarter notes. So 4/4 time means that we have 4 beats in a measure. We discuss time signature and simple meter in a separate video. Just keep in mind that there will be 4 quarter notes within this amount of space here. When played, all 4 notes sound. And I can play this here, and let me make sure it's loud enough. So can you hear that each one of those notes is evenly spaced? The speed is about here, and each note is played for one of those amounts of time. Let me play that again, and you can see the notes are highlighted as it goes by. And then next, we'll replace the second quarter note with a quarter rest. And when played, the second beat is now silent. So this was the first beat. This is the second beat. Each one of these is a beat because there are 4 of them. Again, when we get to time signatures, this will make a little bit more sense. So we have note, rest, note, note. And here's how that sounds. Okay, so let me do that one more time, and I'll use the cursor here sort of as the bouncing ball. And you can see that the rest actually takes up time. There's just no sound. So here it is again. There we go. And next we'll go on to other types of rests. A whole rest occupies the same amount of time as a whole note, and it is drawn as a box descending from the fourth staff line. A way to remember that this is a whole rest, you notice over here the half rest is next to it and it looks very similar. The way to remember this is that the whole rest creates a hole in the fourth line on the staff. If you were walking along this line, you'd step into this hole and you'd fall into it and you'd be very angry. But that's a whole rest. The half rest is on the other side. Another very silly way of remembering this is, I shouldn't call it silly, it's an old student of mine that told me this, and I remember it, so I guess it works, is that she says, a gentleman will remove his hat when meeting somebody, and this can be an example of somebody taking their hat off because it's upside down, and that's a whole gentleman when they remove their hat. And somebody who does not remove their hat is only half of a gentleman, and you can see that the hat remains on here. Maybe that works for you. If not, forget about it. So the half rest is the same thing, except it is on top of the third line of the staff, and as it says here, it's drawn as a box ascending from the middle staff line. And then next we go on to the rests that have flags. This is an example of a flag, just like with eighth notes, but notice that this flag is the opposite direction. On rests, flags always point to the left, so the fan would be on this side blowing the flag to the left. So rests go left, notes go right. And this is an eighth rest, and it says with one flag, the eighth rest has the same duration as an eighth note. Both of these occupy the same amount of time. Here's the flag to the right on the note, and the flag to the left, which is a little different. You know, it doesn't look exactly like a flag. I'm not sure what that looks like, but it needs to look like this. And then with two flags, a 16th rest has the same duration as a 16th note. So this is the extra flag on the 16th, and then we have the extra flag on this. And then just as we had with notes, it says although rarer, rests can have 3 or more flags, going all the way up to the 64th rest over here. We could just keep adding flags and it would continue halving the duration of these. And then here's a chart that was similar to the notes but with rests. And the quarter rests weren't covered very much, but quarter rests look like this, and you'll have an assignment where you have to draw rests, and it will be explained in that assignment how to handwrite these, because these can be a little bit tricky to write. So basically that's it for these basic elements of rhythm. Soon you will have some assignments where you have to complete some rhythmic equations, and I just wanted to show you a few examples of some types of rhythmic equations. For example, if I have a quarter note and I have an equation like this, similar to an arithmetic problem, I have quarter note times 4 equals, and then what I need to do is on the other side put what type of note can fit here, and it needs to be one type. So if I think of quarters, it took 4 quarters to fit into a whole note, therefore the whole note would be the answer here. If I had maybe something like this, how about an eighth note? I know that's an eighth note because of the flag. An eighth note times 2 equals, and the answer would be quarter note in this situation. Then we'll have one other type of question that I'll show you here. How about half note times what equals a whole note? So we know that a whole note breaks into 2 halves. So the answer here would be 2. Okay? So we'll have a few of these types of questions, whether they're notes or rests, everything's applied the same way. And as usual, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.